Super. Thanks everyone for being here for this year's final Peerdom webinar. We are happy to welcome Mark Eddleston, who is sitting right there, who is going to be walking us through his new ways of working playbook and also talking about experimentation inside of organizations. Experimentation in particular around working in different ways together. This topic is of particular interest to us because, as we're in the process of building software to help people work in new ways, we're thinking, what are all the experiments going on out there and which ones are getting kind of a little bit of inertia behind them. And so I'm very curious to hear what Mark's learned out of that and how he's framing these categories of experiments. And also, I think the only way that you can end up moving from how you currently work to working in a new way, and that is overcoming some of the tensions and the problems that you have and the frustrations that you have due to your current collaboration methods, is through running short and safe enough to try experiments that basically can move you from here to there. And when you get there, then you can learn and do the same again. And so I think this experimental mindset is one of the critical ones of inciting change and transformation within the organization. And it's kind of the building block upon which you can think about how to constantly and iteratively better your organization. So I'm particularly excited to focus on this topic, and I'll just give you a quick rundown about how we plan on going through today's hour together, and then I'll pass the torch over to Mark. So following this, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, who will describe a little bit of his new ways of working playbook and go through what he considers the experimental mindset in new ways of working. And then we're going to open up to discussion. And the discussion will be open-ended. Anybody can participate. If you have questions that come up while Mark is walking us through the playbook, or if you have just any questions along the way, please write them in the chat. You can also speak up in the middle section. This is open format, query away. Then following that, I'll give a short Peerdom demo about how we think you could use the tool in order to enable experimentation inside of the organization and to kind of keep track of what experiments are going on in your organization. And finally, I'll pass it back to Mark to close off for a checkout round. In this case, we will look at some of his favorite experiments that he's encountered, or at least some good ideas, and then you will be forced to choose one of your liking. So I'm giving away a little bit of the cliffhanger from the beginning. So we'd like you to also, this is something that makes you really think about what could we be working on tomorrow and already trying. So without further ado, we will move on to Mark. Take it away.
Thanks, Nathan. And yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Mark Eddleston. I'm here in icy Bristol, in the southwest of England, and yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with new ways of working and experimentation. I like to describe myself as a new ways of working nerd, or maybe consultant if I'm trying to sound a little more professional. I came to be a new ways of working nerd around about 10 years ago. That's when it began. And yeah, before that, I'd spent about 10 years working in very traditional organizations. Nowhere cool, nowhere that had conversations around agile or even experimentation with it. It was just very traditional, top-down, kind of triangular shaped organizations with the power concentrated at the top. And yeah, I experienced a few organizations like that. I'm sure you all have as well. It wasn't all bad. Some of them were good. Some of them were not so good. It was a mixture. but I did find them all frustrating to a degree. And my reaction to that frustration would often be to move. So first, I'm from the north of England, so I was working in Manchester when I first began my career, and I'd hop down to London, and then I ended up in various places, Sydney and Melbourne and Peru and New Zealand, because my reaction to these frustrations was, first of all, an assumption that there was something wrong with me, and then to move, go and try some other job in some other place. All of that hopping around led me to Wellington in New Zealand, and happily, the boss there was about to embark on quite a radical experiment around the way that we worked. So this was in an organization called Community Law, and Community Law was a law firm and also a community organization, and it had a really clear purpose, which was to meet unmet legal need. And it so happened that we were amazing at doing this. We had 200, a lot of the staff were lawyers. We also had 200 volunteer lawyers and 100 volunteer law students. And my role was to lead that volunteer program and also to run the family law sessions. So when I joined, the organization was around about 25 or so staff. When the boss had joined, it was more like 5. So if you've ever worked in a team or a company so small, there's not a huge requirement for kind of much of a focus on ways of working. You all interact together really frequently. A team meeting will be, the whole company if there's only 5 of you. So it's clear how you meet. There's an opportunity frequently to feedback. It's clear how decisions are made, who's doing what, so roles are clear. And there's not necessarily a need to have everything written down. But as the organization grew in New Zealand, the need for some clarity around all of those patterns, so meetings, decisions, feedback, roles, and agreements around all of the above. The need for that grew. And the boss, Jeff, who was a reluctant boss, by the way, he actually only worked there because to fund his band, and then ultimately his band didn't make it, and he went full time, and he just happened to be awesome at being the boss. But as they grew from 5 to about 25, his natural reaction was to default and add in that hierarchy that we all know. So middle managers, him at the top, and then middle managers, and then kind of people like me on the front line doing the things without much power or control or autonomy in terms of the decisions that were being made or the way that we had meetings or the opportunity to feedback. It became clear really quickly that this didn't suit the organization. So Jeff spent a lot of time on the sofa reading books like Maverick by Ricardo Semler, and reading books about Spotify and Netflix and other organizations that were working quite differently. And then around about, I think 9 years ago, this was, so soon after Reinventing Organizations was released, he read that book and decided that he wanted to give this a go. So he kind of led an away day and had us all read chapter 2.3, which is the part that says, all right, if you take away this kind of pyramid structure and everything that it contains, what are you going to replace it with? So we kind of went away and read that, and I participated in a consent decision for the first time. So Jeff asked us if we had any if we had any clarifying questions about his proposal to work in a different way, and then we gave our reactions before finally kind of saying whether or not we supported this proposal. And happily for Jeff, everybody was familiar with the tensions that the kind of new structure had surfaced. So we were all willing to go ahead with this experiment. So that was it. That was my first introduction to new ways of working. And the flavor that we went for was self-management. So we called it a self-management journey. And I was kind of sold and somewhat, kind of fell in love with self-management, I think, at that point, because for the first time in my life, I felt like I was empowered to make decisions because we brought the advice process in straight away. And we brought in some meeting structures such as circle discussions, check-ins, lean coffee, and we experimented with various participatory meeting structures. And it felt really great. We were also then trained in feedback, trained in what to do when there's conflict. Our roles, instead of being rigid job descriptions, became quite fluid, fluid role-based. Fluid and role-based, and we had control over them, and it was just a really wonderful place to work. I then kind of had to leave New Zealand and arrived back here in Bristol, and I was fortunate enough to arrive in an organization whose chief exec was also really curious about my experience in New Zealand, and I went immediately on a second self-managing journey where we transitioned from traditional top-down to something a bit more progressive. And then it got me thinking about these patterns. And that second experience wasn't as successful as the first. I think the key difference was that in New Zealand, the whole organization was asked, do you want to try this for now? Whereas here in Bristol, the decision was made by the chief exec and the directors to kind of implement this new structure in a top-down basis. And there was a lot of resistance because people didn't believe it when they were told that they now had autonomy to make decisions and to work in a different way. I probably learned more in that second experience. Through some of those failures, but through a kind of combination of both, I began to think in kind of terms of not kind of labels around ways of working like agile or self-managing or holacracy or sociocracy, all of these things. I've now begun to think of those as kind of window dressing, a little bit like a religion, I guess. You know, you can be you can be Christian or something else, and there's good Christians and there's bad Christians, and the same for any other religion that you'd like to choose. And I think it's the same with top-down. There's good top-down organizations to work for, and there's bad. There's good agile companies, and there's bad agile companies where it doesn't feel good to work there. And the same is true of self-management. And I think it's more interesting to think about the patterns. So what is it that these organizations are doing, regardless of what they identify as? I mean, I don't really mind if they call themselves top-down or agile or self-managing. What is it that they're doing that is keeping their staff engaged and helping them to do great work? And I started looking through all the literature in books like Reinventing Organizations and Going Horizontal and Brave New Work and many, many more, and kind of categorizing what are the things that they're doing differently. And that's how the playbook was kind of born, I guess. I should credit Amy Edmondson because she was on the Leadermorphosis podcast, and right at the end, this is many years ago, she said, Lisa asked her what's next, and she mentioned the idea of creating a playbook. So I kind of waited patiently and then impatiently, and I didn't see this playbook arrive. So I decided to have a go at creating it myself. So rather than describe it, I'm going to show you the playbook. And Nathan, could you let me know how readable it is? I'm going to make it a bit bigger. Is that about right, or?
Looks good to me. Fantastic.
Great. So here it is, the New Ways of Working playbook. And the purpose is right up there at the top. So it's to help you to explore some of the key patterns found in progressive organizations, and crucially, to experiment with some of the most helpful practices out there. And before I dig into some of those patterns, I'm going to start at the top here. So if you are new to the world of new ways of working, then this first section is the place to start. These are some of the best introductory resources that I've come across. So this kind of layout and format will begin to look familiar as we navigate a few more pages, because there's always a few articles at the top, generally nice and short articles explaining whatever the topic is. So in this case, introducing new ways of working. And then there's always a few podcasts, so some of the best podcasts I've come across, and a few videos. And the idea is not that you kind of explore it from top to bottom. You choose whatever you feel like, whatever you've got time for, whatever your learning preference is. So I love podcasts and videos. But if you like to, if you prefer to read, then there's the reading section at the top. So now on to these patterns. So I mentioned meetings, feedback, and decision making. We've also got roles, conflict, and agreements, and a few more down at the bottom. So psychological safety, coaching, mindset, teamwork, and experimentation, of course. Now, I'm going to mention, meetings and feedback and decision making first, because these three I often refer to as the three kind of pillars of new ways of working. And my idea, and this isn't a fact, it's just kind of my thinking, but my hunch, my strong hunch, is that if any organization, regardless of how they identify, if they make improvements in order to make their meetings more effective, and if they make some improvements to ensure that there's quality feedback being exchanged, and if they make some improvements to ensure that decision making becomes more participatory and distributed, then I think it's going to become a better place to work. And with that increased exchange of feedback, and with those effective meetings, and with that empowerment to make decisions, I think some of the other patterns will hopefully emerge. So if there's a lack of clarity around roles, then people are empowered to propose that you try using Peerdom for a month and see if it helps. Or if some of these, the way that we meet, feedback, make decisions, and design our roles are not clearly written down everywhere, so it's confusing for new members of the team, for example, then perhaps somebody will suggest that we write a team handbook. Or if there's conflict, and of course there will be conflict on some level at least, when people get together and try and do work together, there's always some disagreement. So that might crop up, and someone might suggest that we need to get a process in place for when this happens, so that we can do it well and ensure that it's a learning moment. So for those six kind of six of the core patterns, there's a section on theory. So let's have a look at feedback. You'll find a little explainer at the top, which kind of, just a short paragraph really to explain why this pattern is featuring in the playbook. And then a series of articles, a few podcasts, and some talks to watch. So once again, you don't have to go in order. You don't have to read, listen to, and watch everything. I mean, you can. You'll learn a lot if you do. But you can just, go to whatever you're drawn to. Choose the title that stands out to you most, or pick the thing that you've got time for. And use the playbook to learn about these patterns. And then when you're ready to practice, you can kind of do that. Head over here, and here's some things that you can try. So most of the things in the practice sections I will have tried. Certainly brain-friendly feedback I love that model. There's so many feedback models out there. It's quite confusing if you were to just Google feedback models. Brain friendly feedback is probably the best that I've come across for me. But there's some others on here as well, such as situation, behavior, impact. A lot of people are big fans of nonviolent communication for situations that touch on feedback or perhaps even conflict. So there's things that you can try here, such as that brain-friendly feedback model. There's a feedback prep grid. There's a feedback profiles for teams templates that you can work on together. There's workshops that you can try to establish some principles for effective feedback in your team. There's basically all of the best stuff that I've come across on that particular pattern. And there's always a warning as well that, this is challenging and sometimes scary work. So do expect a bit of fear when you're experimenting. And remember, it's impossible to get better and look good at the same time. So allow yourself to be a beginner. And then there's a home button at the bottom. And yeah, the idea really is just to have a think or have a discussion, better still, with your team. And yeah, perhaps ask what feels like it needs some attention at the moment. Are our meetings in need of improvement? Are we not exchanging enough feedback? Are roles unclear? Is decision making too centralized? Is there a little conflict? Do we not have agreements about these patterns? Or maybe it's the team needs to learn about psychological safety or coaching or some of the other patterns down at the bottom. And I think that's it for my for my demo of the playbook. So you saw feedback there. The other sections are the same in terms of the layouts and the encouragement to take some theory if that's what you're craving, or just dive straight in and practice if you're feeling ready or if there's a need.
Super.
Nathan.
Thanks, Mark. Excellent. It's a really cool resource, and there's so much fun stuff to dip into. So I'm going to open a discussion. Maybe people have direct questions. I have a couple off to the side, so I'll kick it off. Please don't hesitate to write anything, and we can kind of treat them in order. And otherwise, speak up as you wish as well. So open discussion, and you can probe into Mark treasure trove here. The first thing that I am curious about are what didn't make the cut for you. Are there things that you identified as like that seemed tempting? I don't know. I'll explain why I'm thinking this. There were two things that kind of came up that I've noticed as a pattern, which is around information transparency and kind of like the ways of sharing information internally in an organization, who has the right to see what's confidential, etc. And also patterns around budgeting or compensation, for instance. And they're both also big, vast topics. Do you have any reasons that you held on to these ones first? Are you expanding? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it wasn't designed to be, a complete set of patterns. And what I wanted to do was choose some of the ones that are easy, some of the perhaps the most tangible. So we can all identify, we all go to meetings. We all have received or wanted to give feedback. We've all got a role, and we've all made or been on the receiving end of decisions. So I think I wanted to choose the ones that were quite simple, I guess. And my hope and my thinking is that some of those other maybe juicier things, such as compensation and transparency and budget, will come to light in the more effective meetings, or when more feedback is exchanged. So that was kind of one reason why the list isn't longer, the list of patterns. But the other one was just to not make it so overwhelming. I I didn't want it to be too sprawling or too big or too scary. I know that a lot of people are scared of terms like self-management or holacracy or agile, and they're very, very confusing. So I wanted to make it as bite-sized and kind of digestible and easy to access as possible. So yeah, it's not because they're not important. My hope is that they'll kind of emerge through those meetings or those feedback conversations.
Super. What about some of the experiments that you've seen in there, or that are a part of the playbook? Do you have any that are your favorite? I mean, you mentioned brain-friendly feedback.
Mm.
Any other creme de la creme from your side?
Yeah, yeah. So probably my favorite. So one of the things that we started doing in Wellington in New Zealand when our self-management journey began was to have meetings in different ways. So we began checking in meetings. Not every single meeting, but for most of our meetings, we'd kind of check in and just say, all right, how are you showing up today? You know, and it was interesting how quickly you got to know your team members on a much deeper level. So, oh, my toddler didn't have a good night's sleep, or my I've got toothache, or I've got some family stuff going on. We began to get to know each other on a bit of a deeper level. So meeting check-ins are a really nice hack if you're in an organization that doesn't use them. Also circle discussions. So there's a section down at the bottom on teamwork, and I'm really, really interested in the research that came out of Harvard and Google and MIT, who all asked the same research question, which was loosely, what is it that makes some teams more effective than others? And their findings, I think they were looking for maybe a formula, here's the perfect blend of characteristics, or these many extroverts and these many introverts, and they didn't find what they were looking for. It turns out there's no recipe. What they found was above average social sensitivity is the number one indicator of a high performing team, and that essentially means that people are quite empathetic, or have above average empathy. But Nathan, let's say we're in a team and we don't score very highly when it comes to empathy. There's not a lot that we can do about that quickly. We can do lots of work over the long term and try and become more empathetic versions of Nathan and Mark, but it's nothing that we can change in a hurry. But interestingly, the second finding for all three, Harvard, Google, and MIT, was the second indicator was psychological safety. And a building block of that is equal talk time. And circle discussions are designed to do just that, to have people talk in turn and encourage all voices to be heard. And we used those routinely in the law center in Wellington, and it felt a little strange at first, and but very quickly you see the benefit of them, because quieter people on the call would all of a sudden have an opportunity. They would have space, and when it was their turn, nobody could interrupt them, and they had the option to pass if they wanted to continue to listen, take a pause and think about how they'd like to contribute, or to go ahead and contribute to the discussion. And it was astonishing how much wisdom came from some of the quieter voices. And I've seen that time and time again as I've introduced it to dozens of organizations that I've worked in or worked with since my experience in New Zealand 8 or 9 years ago. So circles, I think, are a lovely, lovely experiment. But if you're looking to do something a bit more rebellious, perhaps, I had somebody on my course. He worked for Mercedes-Benz, and he was a bit of a character, and he decided that he would cancel indiscriminately every other meeting in his calendar. and then he came back next week to reflect on his experiment, and he said, look, nothing bad happened, and I had loads more time to get through my to-do list, which is now much shorter. So I know that that requires a lot of bravery, and perhaps some to have, he was quite senior, so he had plenty of freedom. So we're not all able to do that, but if you are, that's an interesting experiment, and perhaps a slightly less, slightly less risky experiment. Somebody recently came on the course, and he was fed up with, again on meetings, fed up with all the meetings in his calendar, and he knew that this was a tension that was felt by the people in his team as well. So he proposed a meeting budget of, I think it was 15 hours. So you can spend a maximum of 15 hours in meetings, and the rest of the time is, for doing the work. And his team were absolutely thrilled with this. It made meetings more focused, it made them shorter, it made them more engaging, and then all of a sudden they had the autonomy to show up to that meeting or not. Because if you only had 2 hours of your budget left, you might say, "I'm gonna miss that one because I might need those 2 hours." So I really loved that experiment. So I think those, check-ins, circle discussions, brain-friendly feedback that you mentioned. One recent experiment was to use some software. So I like to use something called Butter, which is like Zoom, and it allows you to just paste a YouTube link in and play the video. So many of the experiments that I've seen have involved lunch and learns. So setting up something like this, but over lunch, maybe only half an hour. And if psychological safety isn't something that's been discussed at your organization, maybe you'll find a talk by Amy Edmondson that's 15 minutes long, and it's her doing a TED talk about psychological safety, and then practice a circle discussion for the next 15 minutes. So you've seen a Harvard business professor talking about one of the patterns that makes teams most effective, and then you've practiced that pattern all in half an hour. I really loved that experiment. So using tech to host, to show videos in lunch and learns to your team.
Great. We have a couple questions to field as well. Jay asked, effectively, how are you supporting people working in careers where they are incredibly hierarchically anchored? So they've been spending a lot of time working in kind of being told what to do. Do you have any maybe experiments that can help loosen that a little bit, or to shift mentality around ownership or autonomy? And then kind of follow-up question on that, or a particular context might be in unions, or I don't know, places where people are used to getting a pay raise or to being promoted by having to take on more responsibility and that kind of ownership. How do you address such context?
Yeah. Well, I think it's much harder, of course. So, I mean, I would say you maybe don't expect to change the whole organization. If it's an enormous union that's very, very hierarchical, it might not be, it's probably not going to be easy to change that meaningfully. But within your context in that organization, within your team, think about what you have agency to do. So is it possible for you to facilitate the next meeting and suggest that you use some healthy meeting structures? Hey, I came across this technique, meeting check-ins. We don't do that here. The purpose of them is to help foster psychological safety. How about we give them a try? And they only take 3 minutes. So you can try and yeah, ask your team if they'd be willing to have a meeting in a slightly different way, and try and sell it to them. Hey, this technique should make our meetings a little more effective. How about we give it a go? Generally, people are quite fed up with either the volume of the meetings, or that they, I don't know, that it's just the same voices that talk. There's many reasons to be frustrated by our meetings, right? So you can just take one of these small practices and circle discussions, meeting check-ins, lean coffee, some liberating structures, and ask the group, hey, how about we try this? Similarly, I think feedback is something that you can do regardless of the context, whether it's a very traditional and top down and hierarchical, or whether it's something a bit more. Oh, my dog's just arrived. Hi. Um, yeah, whether it's. I'm just gonna have to get rid of him. 1 second. Go on, Nico. Yeah. So the other pattern that I was thinking about was feedback. So you can invite more feedback, and that's not going to scare off. Yeah, that shouldn't scare off your colleagues. Hopefully, just to invite more feedback and offer more feedback. I think we've all got control to do those two things. So maybe temper expectations and don't expect to change the nature of of your large unionized environment. Um, but float small, safe to fail experiments. One kind of mindset or way of thinking that I'm a big fan of is 15% solutions. So that's a liberating structure that encourages you to think about, what do I have discretion to do? Not what can't I do? What is within my control and discretion that I don't need permission to try, and I don't need budget to try. So I think some of the patterns are easier than others. Meetings, hopefully you facilitate some, Jane. So try and use some structures. Feedback, invite it and offer it, and then maybe you'll gain a little trust, and then you can maybe experiment with the advice process, perhaps, or something a bit juicier around decision making. But I think roles as well. If there's a lack of clarity around roles, that's not so radical to say to the team, hey, how about we get some more understanding and clarity around our roles and responsibilities? And try and focus on the things that you feel or are causing frustration or tension.
Great, thanks, Mark. And I'm going to hop over to Mark's other question quickly, just because it's related. So this mindset attitude in the hierarchical organization, that's what you kind of were just referring to, or ways to maybe penetrate into that. But Mark makes a point that it's often at the individual level also kind of difficult for some to let go of a top-down mindset. So he's observed that they've been socialized a long time, maybe even from childhood, in thinking in, taking orders rather than autonomously bringing forth. Do you have any thoughts about that? Any thinking around this lifetime of learning a certain way of seeing the world?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's hard enough to change our own mindsets, right, and our own behavior. So my feeling, and I'm happy to be challenged, and I'm wrong every day. So I'm not. This isn't necessarily fact, but I don't know how to change those people to make them more willing. You can just encourage and offer, but I know if you're met with lots of resistance, then that gets very, very tiring. So try and do what you can, but I wouldn't expend too much energy trying to change people who are very, very resistant. Try and experiment in parts of the business or parts of the team, your team or department that are more open to it. you can put on lunch and learns, I guess, and hope to try and change some of, try and encourage mindset shifts for the people who are most resistant. But I think it's better to focus most of your energy on your own mindset towards experimenting with new ways of working, and trying to find some people in your organization that are willing to kind of experiment with you, and and keep on learning. So I realize that's not a that it might not be the answer that you were hoping for, but there's sadly, when it comes to mindset and behavior change, there's no silver bullet. It's really, really hard work, and I think our energy's better placed focusing on those areas where there's willingness to experiment with some stuff. I'm going to share in the chat, because I really love some of the work. I think she's at Harvard as well. Yeah. No, Stanford. Dr. Alia Crum, who was a professional hockey player and then became a Stanford professor of psychology. And she's amazing. There's a really nice TED talk of hers on the topic of mindset, and how it, how what we believe shapes the way that our bodies and minds react to things. So I think it's a really important part of the puzzle when we get frustrated, or we kind of, because it gets tiring when you're met with resistance as you're trying to experiment and make things better in your organization. And this summary of a 2-hour podcast that I've shared in the chat, I find it really helpful when things are getting hard with experimentation.
Super. Thanks. Benjamin, I know that you have a pending question. We're going to move forward for the moment, and we'll swoop back around, time permitting. Otherwise, I'm going to forward this to Mark for private answer, so that in the interest of keeping you all within the time block that we proposed, I'm going to hop over now to looking at Peerdom. So we always do this in a kind of like the discussion and then pragmatic side. How might you implement some of these, what we just discussed in practice? The idea today is I want to walk you through just a way that you could use Peerdom in order to track which experiments are going on, and to kind of give an idea about how what that might end up having in terms of impact in documentation throughout inside of your organization as well. So I'll just run through a quick experiment. I'm going to share my screen here. Great. Let's see if I can. Excellent. Here we are. You all see my screen? We're there. Fantastic. So the first place I'm going to start is just to talk about the notion of intentionally building an experiment, and of putting together a little team, or being clear about who's involved in the experiment or who's pushing it forward, because that sense of ownership over taking something across the line is a way of actually making sure that it moves forward. And I think the explicitness is also something that needs to be there, so that not some people are aware that experiment is going on and others not. So this idea of being explicit about the experiment, we've kind of thought that you could use the projects app. So if you install the projects app, you can add different projects and declare who's working on those teams. We made a project folder. Let me see. We'll go back. A project folder that has several projects inside of it, several experiments. So for instance, you could be tracking your experiments here, the ongoing experiments, for instance, an idea to host a casual weekly check-in where you learn about your teammates, or a ritual where you randomly provide one person in your organization feedback every 2 weeks, something to kind of double down on the types of experiments that Mark is mentioning. And now these projects are composed of teams, and the teams are that can be just one person who's trying to push the experiment forward, but it might also be filled with other roles. So for instance, you might have people from different roles being involved inside of a project team. Project is nothing more than an initiative or a mission, and an experiment can be considered that as well. So this idea of using the projects app to track missions or experiments is one starting point. I should also mention that you can add notes and other sections to those projects, which might link out to other documentation. So one thing that we also prepared and like related to that is inside of the Pages app. And inside of the Pages app, we built a little, this is a documentation tool, effectively. We built a little experiment in here that shows you, that kind of lists what the experiment is, why we're running it, what risks there might be in doing it, how long are we running it for, kind of giving some context around a new work experiment. And the idea would be that you could link this in that notes section of the projects. So you have some content or some documentation around what experiment is going on. And who's maybe involved with this type of thing. By the way, there is an experiment, organizational experiment template out there available from the Ready. We'll share it in the chat as well, where you can kind of see some of the recommended things to define when defining an organizational experiment. This is based off of that. Yeah, and so this Pages app is a place to also put handbooks. Mark was talking about agreements or talking about ways of working. You could also imagine that here you're a little bit more clear about how are you working together? What's your decision-making process? What are the ways that you give feedback to one another? Being explicit about how you're working together and what your current system is can be listed inside of the Pages app here. Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about projects and pages and how those might help you for the agreement section, or talking about decision making, also about being kind of explicit about who's involved in experiments and what roles they're using. Also, I realize now that I should quickly log in and great. I would also point out that we have other ways that you can think about running experiments. So it might be, Mark kind of briefly mentioned this aspect of roles and role clarity. So obviously Peerdom is built, the building blocks are roles. So each of these little circles is a role with clear responsibilities. You might be also wanting to run an experiment where you try out a new organization design, for instance. And in this case, I'll just kind of hop over to another playground because I see that, oh, maybe I don't have, perfect. So we'll start it on here. Inside of a draft space, you can, this is the Drafts app, by the way, you can create fresh drafts of your organization. And inside of there, you can play around with, okay, what new roles might be involved in our next iteration? What new responsibilities could be there? You can also play around with taking an old version of one of your roles and modifying it inside of the draft area. So for instance, this role here, I would just go and copy it. And I will copy it to a draft that we just created. So I'll move it inside of the draft. And the idea here is that I want to go work on that role in a space which is safe to experiment. And over in the draft that we just created, we have that role. And here you could mess around with it, change who is holding it, change their contributions, modify the responsibilities, etc., regroup, reorganize, do whatever you'd like. And then you have the ability to copy that offline in draft work back to your live published map. So this gives you a kind of offline space for experimentation that is not just directly influencing your published map. So I think this combination of role explicitness, explicitness around which experiments are going on, being clear about agreements, maybe through the Pages app. There's a kind of combination of using different apps inside of Peerdom that you can do in order to track both the beginning and the team leading an experiment, but also some of the relics, some of the proposals that are coming up from there. And I just finish off by mentioning that another one of Mark's patterns is the feedback app, or feedback, and we offer a feedback app as well inside of Peerdom. And the feedback app is quite simple as well. You go to a colleague, and when it's installed, you have the ability to provide someone feedback or to request feedback from them. And in doing so, let's see if I'm able to. In doing so, you have to kind of, we've qualified this feedback as being not only peer-to-peer, but also role-to-role. So it's not speaking about the person in general, but it's saying with your work in a particular role and from my perspective in another role, what is the feedback? So it's really like targeting the work within a particular role in the profile of another peer. So this feedback can be sent and is collected on one's profile and is private between two peers. So again, I think this kind of trinity, or I don't know, square of different apps, because we went over 4, can contribute to thinking about experimentation within Peerdom. So that's all that I'm kind of teasing today, and I'm more than willing to answer your questions if you want to write me offline. And Mark, I'm going to pass back to you to just introduce your little exit survey where everybody can do a little thinking on what they would like to try next.
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, so I'll share my screen, but I'm also going to post a page in the chat, which is something I prepared for this group. So I mentioned that people on my course run experiments, and I've got a kind of collection of close to 800 experiments now that people on my course have come up with, and in that there's lots of trends, and there's some, I guess, some favorite experiments that I've captured on the list. So I'll share my screen and show you. Yeah, so here's a bunch of new ways of working experiments broken down into themes. So you've got the oops, it's just reloading. You've got some feedback experiments at the top there, but above that, let's just quickly have me explain the box at the top, which just clarifies that there's no shortcut or manual or roadmap or one size fits all approach to new ways of working, and the only way that you can get there is through experimentation. And if we stop experimenting, then our new ways of working journey ends. So this is a list of suggested experiments that you can use to either copy or to take inspiration from. And my suggestion is that you keep your experiments nice and small, safe to try, time bound. So here they are. Here's a few examples. So for many of the patterns that I've got in the playbook, there's about three experiments for each, and I'll let you kind of read through in your own time. But it's things like, thinking about appreciative and constructive feedback. There's references to a few different models. So situation, behavior, impact is a really helpful model if you have some feedback to share. Brain-friendly feedback is probably my favorite. So there's a wonderful, if you can find it in the playbook in the theory section. There's a wonderful 5-minute explainer video from the creator of that. So you could share that with your team, or you can make some feedback requests. Oh, Nico's back, my dog. watch out. And then there's some suggestions for experiments you can do around meetings, around decision making, roles, working agreements, mindset, and psychological safety. Sorry, I'm getting poured on the door. Sorry, he's not leaving me alone. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing my screen there, and I'll let you have a look through those experiments. And I guess the invitation is to maybe share in the chat or unmute if you want, once you've scanned, had a quick read through. Is there anything on there that you'd love to try, or that you want to encourage people to try, or that you'd even commit to trying in your team? And Nathan, I'll let you start. You can share a commitment.
Great. I was just scanning a little bit deeper. So I'm curious to dig a bit deeper into your brain-friendly feedback recommendations here. One, because of my background in cognitive neuroscience, so I am curious what's going on here. Two, because in our team, there have been several people mentioning to me that feedback processes are lacking, and as we grow, that seems to be a rising tension. So I think this is where I would personally go, and I know that that's not a very specific one, but I'd probably just pick up your recommendation and roll with that. So thanks for sharing these. I'm gonna pass the torch over to Jane. Take it away.
Hi, I just looking at the list. There is a senior meeting that I attend, and it is silent. So I am going to suggest to some quite senior people that we attempt to use the circle meeting construct, which will be incredibly uncomfortable. But hopefully they'll at least start talking and giving their views.
Great. That's my favorite. One of my favorites, Jane. Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
The nice thing about that one is it's so simple. I love it.
Nenad, I'm gonna pick you, since you've also been sharing your face here and look open to and quite interactive. Go ahead.
Yeah, so for me, because I'm mostly involved with organizations that have new ways of working as a normal, I really don't know what to suggest as a, because we are trying it all the time. And this is actually, in a way, quite comfortable position to be in, because there's no resistance. We just do it.
That's great. So it can exist out there. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Fantastic. I think with that, unless somebody wants to share or raise their hand, we'll try to end. We started just 2 or 3 minutes late, so we're in a perfect 1 hour zone. And after Angelica shares, we can wrap things up. Please, Angelica.
Well, I didn't want to say anything besides thanks a lot. It's really interesting and fascinating. I just wanted to show my face again, because I think it's nice to that also you guys, Mark and Nathan, can see who's actually participating and observing everything. So thanks a lot. It's really inspiring and interesting. And yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thanks for popping up for that. And thank you everyone for your attention this hour. We will send out a recording to those who missed parts, and also we'll share Mark's address so that you can get in touch with him. Same with mine in case you have any other questions. And yeah, carry forth. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thank you.